Some sounds in motorsports are straight up iconic. That screaming, high-pitched wail you hear when an F1 car hits full throttle, the chest-rattling boom of a top-fuel dragster. But in the 1960s, something totally unexpected started echoing through American drag strips. It was the deep, growling rumble of a V8. But here's the twist. It wasn't coming from a muscle car. It was coming from a motorcycle. And hanging onto that motorcycle, wrestling it down a quarter-mile strip, was a guy who clearly didn't care much for the laws of physics or his own safety. This wasn't some high-budget, factory-sponsored race team. Nope. This was the brainchild of one man from the quiet farmlands of Michigan, armed with a cutting torch, insane mechanical instincts, and an idea that most people would have called a straight-up death wish. His name was E.J. Potter, but to the crowds and the promoters, he was known as the Michigan Madman. His builds were like Frankenstein's monsters, raw, loud, and full of fury, and the most infamous of them all carried a name that said it all: the Widowmaker. This wild machine, packing a 500-horsepower Chevy engine between two wheels, didn't just turn heads, it smashed records and sealed Potter's place in the history books as one of the boldest builders the racing world has ever seen. This isn't just a tale about a fast bike, it's about a farm boy with calloused hands and a mind that refused to color inside the lines, someone who took the impossible and made it real. It's a story of pure, unfiltered genius where the gap between crazy and brilliant gets lost in a haze of burning rubber. It's about a guy who looked at a car engine, looked at a motorcycle, and thought, yeah, let's make history. But before we dive into the chaos, the crashes, and the mind-blowing engineering that made E.J. Potter a legend, take a second to hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell. We're bringing you the wildest stories from the golden age of motorcycles. Tales of fearless builders, outrageous machines, and the moments that rewrote motorsports history. Trust us, you're not going to want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. To understand the guy who became the Michigan Madman, you've got to go back to where it all started. Ithaca, Michigan. A small, no-frills town smack in the middle of the state, surrounded by the flat, hard-working farmland of the Midwest. Not exactly a hotspot for thrill seekers, this was a place where grit, know-how, and getting things done with your own two hands mattered most. And it was right there, on a quiet family farm, that Elon Jack Potter took his first steps toward becoming a legend. His dad was a fascinating mix, a farmer and a chemistry professor, and that mix of hands-on know-how and scientific curiosity rubbed off hard on EJ. From early on, school just didn't click for him. Sitting in a classroom felt pointless when his brain was wired for motion, noise, and combustion. While other kids were flipping through textbooks, EJ was elbow-deep in tractor engines, his hands always stained with grease. The farm wasn't just where he lived, it was his workshop, his personal classroom. He didn't just learn how machines worked, he felt it, like he had a built-in radar for anything with gears and fuel. The spark for his most famous creation didn't come in a garage, it hit during a dull high school class. While the teacher rambled on, EJ was off in his own world, sketching a Harley-Davidson V-twin. Then, out of nowhere, lightning struck. From a certain angle, the V-twin kind of resembled a small block V8, just way smaller. It was a crazy thought. A massive, torque-heavy car engine stuffed into a skinny motorcycle frame that was never meant to handle that kind of power. Totally absurd, and exactly the kind of idea EJ lived for. He told his buddies about the idea, and they burst out laughing. To them, it was a joke, a wild fantasy that had no shot at reality. But instead of shutting it down, their laughter lit a fire under him. That simple, offhand laugh turned into a challenge. He wasn't just going to dream it, he was going to do it. Years later, when someone asked what made him even try something so insane, EJ gave an answer that summed him up perfectly. Raw, honest, and a little self-deprecating. Basically, it was ignorance, he said. I didn't really know what a Chevrolet engine was, except the hot rod magazines were talking about it being the smallest, lightest, most powerful car engine that had ever been built. I didn't really know what I was getting into. And that so-called ignorance, it turned out to be his greatest weapon. In 1960, at just 19 years old, E.J. Potter took that wild classroom sketch and turned it into something very real and very terrifying. He was no longer just the kid from the farm, he was stepping into the world as a full-blown mechanical trailblazer. The build kicked off with a Harley-Davidson frame, which he wasted no time chopping in half with a cutting torch. Into that freshly hacked gap, he began cramming in a beast, the 283 cubic inch Chevy small block V8. It was like stuffing a lion into a dog crate, and EJ was all in. It's hard to overstate just how bold this move was. EJ wasn't just tweaking a motorcycle, He was tearing apart everything it was supposed to be. He welded in thick square tubing to support the iron monster of an engine and slapped on a tiny gas tank salvaged from a Whizzer motorbike. This wasn't some sleek CAD-designed build. It was raw, hands-on, grease under the fingernails engineering. The finished machine looked like a head-on collision between a hot rod and a motorcycle. Long, oversized, and so utterly wrong that it somehow felt perfect. He gave it a name that matched its savage presence: Bloody Mary. But here's where things got tricky. How do you actually deliver that kind of insane power to the back wheel? A standard clutch and chain would have disintegrated the moment he hit the throttle. His first shot at a solution was classic farm boy ingenuity: a centrifugal clutch cobbled together from a Harley brake and a sprocket off a combine. Clever as hell, but totally outgunned. The Chevy V8 had way too much torque, and the setup just couldn't take the abuse. It was smart, sure, but nowhere near strong enough for the beast he'd built. Frustrated, but far from giving up, Potter decided to give the beast a shakedown run right on the streets of Ithaca. And, no surprise, it didn't take long for the local cops to catch wind of it. They pulled him over, took one look at the Frankenstein machine he was straddling, and basically said, "Yeah, absolutely no. Don't ever let us catch this thing on the road again." It could have been a setback, but instead it turned out to be the push he needed. If the street was off limits, there was only one place left that could handle something this wild: the drag strip. EJ hauled Bloody Mary out to a local drag strip, the kind of place where genius and madness often blurred together. On his first run, things went sideways fast. The second he cracked the throttle, the V8 unleashed a tidal wave of torque that ripped the rear sprocket clean off the hub. Total mechanical carnage. The run was a bust. Most people would have called it quits right there. But as EJ sat in the pits, staring down at the wreckage, fate stepped in. Walking over was another builder of outrageous machines, none other than Art Arfons, the legend behind the Green Monster jet cars, a guy who understood crazy better than most. Arfons took one look at Bloody Mary and told Potter straight up the idea was incredible. If he could just figure out how to stop it from self-destructing, he could actually make money with it. Coming from a legend like Arfons, that wasn't just a compliment, it was a green light. And then came the kicker. Arfons handed over his little black book, packed with contacts for drag strip promoters all over the country. Around the same time, the local promoter, clearly hooked by the spectacle, made Potter an offer: $1 for every mile per hour he could hit over 100. Just like that, this wasn't some wild experiment anymore. It was a career, a loud, dangerous, potentially lucrative one too. EJ Potter's story is hands down one of the most jaw-dropping tales in motorsports history. A wild ride fueled by grit, guts, and pure mechanical madness. If this kind of story fires you up like it does us, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. We're always uncovering the legends behind the world's most insane machines and the fearless minds who built them. And trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, with the promise of a real career and a vote of confidence from a legend, EJ Potter set out to turn his wild, barely contained monster into a reliable, record-breaking machine. And this is where his farm-bred brilliance kicked into high gear. He wasn't just some thrill-seeker with a death wish, he was a hands-on problem solver, staring down mechanical issues no one had ever faced before, mostly because no one else was insane enough to build them in the first place. The first and biggest hurdle? The clutch. His homemade setup had already failed, and anything strong enough to handle the V8's brute force was way too bulky and heavy for a bike. So EJ came up with a solution that was equal parts genius and terrifying: ditch the clutch entirely. He built a direct drive system, hooking the engine's crankshaft straight to the rear wheel using a beefy roller chain. No clutch, no transmission, no gears. If the engine was running, that rear wheel was moving. Simple, brutal, and completely unforgiving. Of course, this fix brought on a whole new, wildly dramatic problem. How do you launch a motorcycle with no clutch? Potter's answer wasn't just clever, it became his signature move, a kind of mechanical theater that etched his name into drag racing folklore. He built a heavy-duty rear stand to lift the back tire off the ground. Before every run, he'd prop the bike up, fire up the V8, and suddenly the world would go silent, except for the deafening roar of raw horsepower. He'd twist the throttle, sending the engine screaming towards 7,500 RPM, the rear tire spinning into a blur, already topping a theoretical 100 miles per hour, all while the bike sat frozen in place. The tension at the line was insane. The crowd stood frozen, eyes locked on Potter as he sat balanced on what looked and sounded like a rolling explosion waiting to happen. The bike shook violently under him, the V8 howling, the rear tire spinning like mad. Then, in one bold move, he'd give the stand a hard kick, bam! And just like that, the bike dropped to the pavement and launched like a missile. No hesitation, no turning back, just raw power unleashed in an instant. The instant that spinning tire slammed into the pavement, all hell broke loose. It wasn't just a launch, it was an explosion of force. The bike erupted in a blinding cloud of white smoke as the tire tore itself to pieces against the asphalt, desperately clawing for grip that didn't exist. The rear end fishtailed violently, and Potter had to fight it like a rodeo bull, wrestling the bars, shifting his weight, feathering the throttle just enough to keep the beast pointed straight. He wasn't riding it so much as surviving it. This was the only way to tame that monstrous power, but it came at a price. The rear tire, a regular car tire since drag slicks were too wide to manage, was completely shredded after just 3 runs. But getting it off the line was only half the fight. The sheer power of that V8 brought a whole new wave of problems. The old Harley frame just couldn't take the abuse, so Potter scrapped it and built something smarter, a custom frame with a thick tubular backbone that used the engine itself as a stressed member of the chassis. It was a radical design choice, years ahead of its time. Even with the stronger frame, the engine's torque constantly tried to rip the front wheel off the ground, and the vibration. It was like getting punched by a jackhammer for the full 9 to 10 seconds of the run. Riding it wasn't just a challenge, it was a full-body assault. Potter's fixes were never sleek or polished. They were raw, rough, and brutally effective. Every solution came from necessity and a gut-level understanding of how things moved, broke, and barely held together. This wasn't about finesse, it was about function, and Potter knew exactly what he was selling. Speed was only part of the show, the real draw was the danger. As he once put it, the crowds weren't just there to watch him go fast, they showed up because there was a good chance he might crash. To be worth a paycheck from a promoter, people had to believe he'd nearly died out there, and most nights he made sure they did. With his signature launch dialed in, a violent spectacle of smoke, speed, and pure chaos, E.J. Potter's career exploded. He went from being the weird local guy with a death wish to a full-blown national sensation. The Michigan Madman had officially arrived, and drag strips across the country and eventually around the world were lining up to book his act. For over a decade, he hit the road as a one-man thrill show, packing stands with fans eager to watch the guy crazy enough to ride a V8 on 2 wheels. And his Bloody Mary was just the beginning. Over the course of his career, Potter went on to build 7 V8-powered bikes. The first 3 all carried the Bloody Mary name, but after he got married, he figured it was time for a new name, one that reflected just how high the stakes really were. The next series of machines got a title that was both a warning and a promise: the Widowmaker. Each new bike was a step up, a constant evolution of power and insanity. He started with the modest 283, but it didn't stay that way for long. The engines grew into 350 cubic inch small blocks, pushing north of 500 horsepower. He swapped out carburetors for Hilborn fuel injection, dialing in even more performance. And he didn't stop there. He fed the engines a wicked cocktail of alcohol and other volatile additives, turning the bikes into barely controlled explosions on wheels. The peak of Potter's wildcraft came with Widowmaker 7, built in 1971. This was the crown jewel of his madness, a machine that brought all his hard-earned chaos into sharp, blazing focus. With it, he took his act international, roaring through England, Canada, and Australia. And it was on a gritty strip of asphalt mixed with crushed clamshells where he made history. A blistering quarter-mile run of 8.68 seconds at 172 miles per hour. For a garage-built bike running on a car tire, it was mind-blowing. In 1973, Widowmaker 7 earned a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's fastest motorcycle. The farm kid from Ithaca had done it. He was officially a world record holder. But E.J. Potter's fame wasn't just about the numbers, it was about the experience. Winning was never the point. As motorsports journalist Roger Miners put it, E.J. wasn't looking to win anything. He just showed up and tried to make people go, "Oh my God." And he nailed it, every single time. An E.J. Potter run wasn't just a race, it was a full-blown sensory assault. The ground would rumble beneath your feet, the air thick with the stench of fuel and scorched rubber, and then came that insane, sideways launch into a hurricane of smoke and noise. It wasn't just fast, it was unforgettable. Of course, when you dance that close to the edge, sometimes you fall. Crashes were part of the package, and honestly, part of the show. EJ knew the risks, and so did the crowd. He was a showman through and through, riding that fine line between control and chaos. And he did it for 13 wild years, constantly pushing the boundaries of what one man, a wrench, and a fire-breathing machine could do. After more than a decade of manhandling V8-powered monsters, EJ Potter hung up his leathers in 1973, stepping away from the two-wheeled exhibition world. But his legacy, it goes way beyond quarter-mile times and world records. EJ Potter became a folk hero of the internal combustion age, a one-man rebellion against convention. He showed the world that with vision, guts, and a little backyard ingenuity, one person could create something unforgettable. He wasn't trained in engineering schools. He was trained by broken parts, busted knuckles, and trial by fire. His story lit a fire in generations of builders who saw in him the purest form of the hot rodding spirit. As Mike Wolfe from American Pickers put it best, he was a moto pioneer in the truest sense. He was doing something that maybe no one had ever done before. EJ Potter's legacy lives on in steel, rubber, and roaring horsepower. His most iconic machines, Bloody Mary and Widowmaker 7, were famously showcased on American Pickers, reintroducing their wild story to a whole new generation of gearheads. These bikes aren't just relics, they're monuments to a time when motorsports was raw, dangerous, and deeply personal. A time when guys like the Michigan Madman weren't just racers, they were legends. His whole life was an adventure in overdrive. He was a walking paradox, a soft-spoken, humble guy from small-town Michigan who built some of the loudest, most outrageous motorcycles the world had ever seen. They called him a madman, but under all that smoke and fury was a mind of rare mechanical brilliance, sharp, precise, and endlessly inventive. He wasn't just the guy twisting the throttle, he was the builder, the engineer, the test pilot, and the showman all rolled into one. EJ didn't just ride the line between genius and insanity, he built it. EJ Potter passed away in 2012 at the age of 71, but his story still roars through the annals of motorsport history, a lasting tribute to the chaos, creativity, and courage he brought to the drag strip. He wasn't just a builder or a rider, he was a storyteller in sparks and smoke, a one-man spectacle fueled by instinct and fearlessness. His life was driven by a simple, powerful philosophy he once summed up perfectly. Ignorance is a powerful tool if applied at the right time. Lots of times a guy will jump into a project without knowing how far over his head he is until it's almost too late to back off. This is a situation that I frequently wake up to in the middle of another adventure. And that, right there, is the spirit of EJ Potter, the Michigan Madman. A story at its core, a profoundly American one. It's about raw ingenuity, fierce independence, and the relentless pursuit of one wild, impossible idea. It reminds us that the biggest breakthroughs don't always come from high-tech labs or corporate think tanks. Sometimes they come from a farm boy with a welder, a V8 engine, and the guts to build something the world never saw coming. So, what do you think of the Michigan Madman story? Was he a genius, a daredevil, or both? And what's the craziest garage-built machine you've ever come across? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. We'd love to hear your picks. And if you're into stories about the golden age of horsepower, the rebels who pushed limits, and the machines that left burnouts on history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. So until next time, ride safe, ride hard, and we'll see you on the next ride.